No, it's video as well. All right, we're finally live. Hi, everyone. For those of you that are joining us, it's PJ Patterson for the Money Matters podcast. We had a little bit of technical difficulty here at my end this morning trying to get my webcam to work. So I scrambled around, got it sorted. And I'm glad I did, because I am really excited about the conversation I'm going to have today with Whenua Oner and Shayne Hayes of Family Aged Care Advocates. It's a topic that I have become very interested in over the last 6 to 12 months, probably because my own client base has, I've been contacted by a lot of people who are beginning to have aged care issues. And these guys are specialists in aged care senior living. And the marketing info that I put out was sort of around this idea of aging with dignity. Now, I know there's a slight delay in the feed, guys. I do apologize for that, but I'll try not to cut you off when you're talking. But tell me, let's start off with aging with dignity. Why are the two of you so passionate about that particular topic?
Yeah.
Thanks. So I'm a registered nurse, but I've come out of management of aged care services in New South Wales and Queensland. And I know what traditional aged care is and how we deliver it. And I think it's so important that people really explore what that aging experience is to them, and then try and look for ways that they can tailor what's provided and do it in a way that's quite meaningful, rather than just getting lost in the system. Shayne, I know you've...
Awesome.
Yep. So from my perspective, PJ, I've got a financial planning background like you have. And, I went on a bit of a journey looking for a bit of a niche area that I could work in. And it just so happened that when I was having those thoughts, I was sort of living a personal experience with the aged care journey. And it simply came down to, PJ, when I was going through this, I didn't know where to start. I didn't know who to contact. I didn't know what questions to ask. I didn't know if I was asking a good question, whether I was getting a good answer back. So that really got me thinking and going down the aged care path, if you like. And Whenua and I have teamed up together because when it comes to aged care, this isn't just about the numbers or the dollars or the care. It's a combination of the two. So we have joined forces to run Family Aged Care Advocates for that reason. We're offering a full service under the one roof.
Fantastic. Thanks for that bit of an intro. And I know you both are passionate about this stuff. And I want to delve into today, probably over the next 30 to 40 minutes, some of the questions that I guess have been on my mind, but certainly there would be plenty of people out there wondering about this space. And sadly, I think, and I'd love to hear your comments on this, but I think people don't necessarily, start talking about this until it's right in their face, and maybe even sometimes too late. So let's start off with this question. Why do families need to discuss this topic, and when should they begin discussing this topic?
Yeah, off you go. Ladies first.
So I think, you absolutely nailed it when you said, often these conversations don't get started until there's a crisis, which invariably means that, we're often not, when our brain's in a crisis state, it's not taking in all the information. It can't go through its usual rational processes. There becomes a lot of emotion and a need for really quick responses, which may not be in line with the dignified outcome that you were kind of envisaging that you'd like to see. So a big part of our mission is to start these conversations earlier, be really proactive about this, get the family together, have a really shared and mutual understanding and expectations around what you're expecting from what living life as an aged person might look like for your family. So that's a really key thing, is start talking sooner.
Yeah. PJ, this is classically where we start with families when it comes to the aged care journey. Is we'll get a phone call from a family member, typically, saying that mum or dad has had a fall at home. They've gone to hospital because they broke their hip. The hospital have fixed them up, rehabilitated them, and then the family get the phone call to say, hey, come and get mum and or dad. But we're sorry to say that either they can't go home, or if they do go home, they need a bit of help in the home. So that's probably, I don't know, probably around about 60 to 70% of our phone calls that we get where people are in a panic. And we call that the hospital hallway or hospital car park conversation. Mm-hmm. And as you know, PJ, when it comes to making decisions, whether that be with money or with life, when you're put under pressure and high emotion, you typically don't make the best decisions.
Yeah, that's very true. Very true.
Mm-hmm. So that's the reason why we want to get people to maybe take a step back from that position and say, well, why don't we have these conversations before we get to that point? And that's what drives us.
So when do you think is, I suppose, the most appropriate time to start having that conversation? I guess the easiest way to do that, I suppose, would be to put an age around that. So I'll give you an example. Like in my case, I'm going to be, my birthday is actually on Monday. I share my birthday with the Queen, and I'll be 49. And my father's passed away, unfortunately, but my mother's about 70. I think she's 77. And so, I visit, she lives in the US. I visit her from time to time, and I'm obviously on the lookout, for signs that she might not be able to live on her own anymore. But, using maybe that as an example, when should I start to have that conversation with potentially my mother, but also I have a sibling, my brother, as well?
I think the one thing that's hard about using your numerical age is that we don't all age the same way. I mean, I've met a lot of really quite young 90-plus-year-olds that are phenomenally independent and living amazing lives. And I've met some very, very old 50-plus-year-old people that are not doing so well. So I think it's hard to wrap it in numbers. I think it's about being proactive. I mean, like the one thing that is absolutely indisputable is that we will all age. Exactly how we do it is what's different. So when do you start having the conversation? Well, I'd bring it back to probably a numbers thing and say, well, when's the best time to start financially planning your life as well? Do you do it when you're earning good money, or do you do it when you're starting your career? Like it's a similar kind of paradigm. I think the thing is, if you've got elderly parents and you need to be fairly clear that at some point something's going to be needed in their aging journey, it's probably a good idea to start talking tomorrow, so to speak. Especially if there's questions around capacity, because cognitive capacity and dementia is a big impact on quality of life outcomes. And the unfortunate thing about that is that it tends to sneak up on people, and they don't have the conversation early enough because they don't need to, but then they leave it too long that their capacity isn't there to understand and explain what's relevant or right for themselves. So you've got like a couple of competing forces at play.
Yeah. The thing about, Whenua is right, PJ. Is there a right age or right number? Well, no, we don't see that. There's no patterns there, but it's about those little signs. So, and this won't happen in your case, PJ, unfortunately for your birthday, but, the family gather around to celebrate somebody's birthday or Christmas. And we just happen to notice as a family that, mum is struggling a little bit more than normal to maybe get out of a chair, or dad is maybe struggling a little bit to remember some things that have happened in the past. So just little signs like that are normally the trigger point to say, and we can quite easily see those things and just sort of let them go through to the keeper and think, well, that's just the way it is. But maybe really getting to that point and seeing those signs and then thinking as a family, maybe we should talk a little bit more about what it is that mum and dad are looking for. and when I say mum and dad, I'm thinking about from the family perspective, the sons and daughters, the mid 40s to 50s sort of sons and daughters who are typically charged with looking after or helping out with this process. So that's the classic sign to start having those conversations rather than, waiting for, because when it comes to what we see, PJ, when it comes to the aged care journey, it typically happens really fast. Right. There's a trip or there's a fall in the home, and then all of a sudden things are happening really, really quickly.
Interesting. You said a lot there, and I appreciate that you pulled me up on the age. Age is not a number, which is, you're absolutely right about that. You got some 90-year-olds who are, the 90's the new 50, and then you got some 50-year-olds who are just, I don't know, giving up on life or whatever, and are just one foot in the grave kind of thing already. But I suppose a couple of things I want to dive into in what you said there. First of all, how do you start that conversation? Because I know some people can be very defensive when you bring it up. So let's use that example you just gave about the birthday party. Mom is, struggling to get up a bit more, whatever. Do you have any suggestions on how or what is a good way to start that conversation, especially with mom, but maybe even the other family members?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of, family dynamics are really interesting at the best of times, even in the most, happy of families. I think there's always, these kind of conversations always bring up quite different perspectives that you're not always expecting. And I think, the underlying purpose of the conversation shouldn't, I think if it's about understanding a shared and mutual understanding around what the expectations of aging are, I think that's a little bit less defensive than, you're old and you need to be, you can't live like this anymore. I think sometimes a lot of families go into the conversation in quite a, you can't do this, or, you're not a spring chicken, brings all those things that we don't really want to acknowledge in ourselves. Don't tell me I can't do something, because then I'm just going to dig in my toes and want to do it for longer. So, I think a really nice framework around diving into the conversation is seeking to understand, how are you living now? Like, what are you doing now? What's working for you? What do you enjoy about how you're living now? And what are some of the things that are a little bit difficult about how you're living now? Where do you live? Where are you actually physically located, and how does that support you in living the life that you want to live? And then probably the critical question is, how do you want to live? This shouldn't be a conversation that's about dying. It should be a conversation about your life. How do you live? How do you want to live? Like, what are your goals and aspirations for this stage in your life? Because, unlike, say, 150 years ago, when it was quite a short stage in your life, it's now quite a long stage. Like, you're going to spend quite a bit of time in this period. How do you want that to look like? And then when you understand that, and then when you can understand those sort of fears and strengths, then I think you can start having much stronger conversations about how you would support mum or dad live like that.
Awesome. And one of the things you guys do, and I'm just looking at the brochure stuff that you sent me, Shayne, you guys do this thing called a family conference. And I'm really curious to know, because this sounds kind of like, like something you do in a family conference. So just, can you elaborate on it? Because that's the first sort of step, it looks like, in your process. You have a family conference. So maybe if you could just, speak to that and tell me and anyone listening to this, what a family conference looks like. What does that actually, how does that start? What do you do?
Well, the first thing that I guess is different. Anyone can bring the family together and have a conversation. I think, though, what's difficult with the family doing it themselves is everyone has their vested interest in the outcome. Everyone has their role in the family. And And with those roles are sort of expectations around who can say what or who has the right to speak or not to speak. So what we're doing, the purpose of the family conference is it's about putting in a neutral facilitator, I suppose. I mean, I have no vested interest in your family. What I'm doing is coming into the space to help you have that conversation, help get that shared and mutual understanding around what does aging with dignity look like for mum, for dad, and then how are we going to achieve that? Like, who needs to play what role from a legal and financial point of view? Who's the right person to be the enduring guardian or the power of attorney? At what point might we trigger selling the house or not, as the case may be? So our role in that conversation is not so much to go, well, I know all about aging and this is what you need to do. That's not the role at all. Our role is to provide a space where we can bring together the family and ensure that those questions, the right questions, get asked, that we get input from everybody that needs to give input, that there's a safe space, that we can go away, process that information and get it back to the family so you can then sort of look at it and reflect on it, go, oh, yeah, okay, I missed that part, or, yeah, that makes sense, and then you can move on with your planning, because the big part of this is planning. Like, it's about proactive planning, so you're not having the crisis conversation.
PJ, when it comes to having the family conferences, a couple of things I'll add to what Whenua just said there. And when it comes to making decisions, either for yourself or for other people, you've seen that circle where you can work out how much you know that you know versus how much you don't know versus how much you don't know what you don't know. And normally that segment of the circle is much bigger than what you know that you know. If I haven't twisted my tongue around there, but the whole idea of the family conference is to get the right people in the right room to have the right conversations by asking the right questions. And sometimes the right questions are the ones that we don't even know that we don't know. And our role is simply to, one, like Whenua said, to be the independent mediator, if you like. Not the good cop versus the bad cop, but be independent, but also to help guide the conversation so that the right questions are being asked to get the right answers. And that's, in a nutshell, what our family conference is all about. And it's, we're very passionate about this, PJ. This is the first point typically in the aging cycle, but it's the most important, and it's the one that very few families do, because we just don't want to talk about that sort of stuff. There's some, taboo subjects. Aging, one of them. Money, another one. Maybe politics, although that's changing a little bit, is another one. But the idea behind this is to get comfortable with having those sometimes uncomfortable conversations and making sure that the right people are in the right room to have them. Because when it comes to, this is typically how things play out, PJ, and it might play out in your family because you're, by the sound of it, living remote from your mum overseas. But typically what happens in a family is someone gets nominated to be the person that's going to help mum or dad out. That's typically what happens. And it's a bit like in the corporate world, you get nominated to do jobs when you're away that day, and they say, oh, PJ will do all that. But when it comes to the family, typically one person either steps up or gets stepped up for to, sort of guide mum or dad through that. Either you live geographically closer to mum or dad, or PJ, you've always been the favourite son. And most of the family are quite happy to go along with that until, of course, there's a decision made that, you and I are brothers, PJ. You're nominated to look after mum. I go, yep, I'm happy with that, PJ. I trust you. And then all of a sudden you make a decision that I just don't agree with, and then all hell breaks loose.
Yeah, and that's a funny dynamic, isn't it? And I hear these stories all the time. Not all the time, but certainly I hear them regularly enough where exactly that, a family member is charged with looking after mom or dad or both, because, as you said, they're geographically the closest. They might live on the same street, just in the next suburb. They take a decision that other family members don't like or whatever, and then it's on. The poo hits the fan, and everybody's fighting over something that they really shouldn't be fighting over. It's interesting. Do you have any suggestions or tips for people on how to deal with that? Because it's, we're all human and we have human emotions. And when you have family, you have health, you have money, all of these, very highly charged things in the same pot, it's easy to lose control. How do you guys coach and counsel people when you're doing the family conferences and stuff to just keep it, professional, I guess, as much as possible?
Yeah, it's hard, and I think that's why we're really so keen for people to have really good conversations that really unpack the issues, but also kind of clearly identify who in the family is going to do what, and then try and have some shared understanding around that decision making, because there's emotions involved sometimes, to some extent that isn't always enough. But I think it's the best thing that you can do to kind of alleviate the long held, it's amazing how long families will hold on to events that happen, and how detrimental that can be to relationships. Whereas I think if there's been a good conversational process before there's sort of some drama, it gives opportunity for people to kind of be aware of that. And whilst you probably can't bring that back up in the first 5 minutes post that decision, you can probably come back to it after, some steam and emotions been let off, and kind of go, yeah, but remember we spoke about this and this was my job to do. I think, if there's anything, if there's any big decisions that need to be made, regardless of what planning you've put in, always helpful to kind of reach out to the family and go, hey, this is coming up, any input, what would that be? Difficult if it's a crisis situation and you just need to make a decision. And again, that comes down to having a really good understanding about what everyone's expectations are, and particularly mum and dad, because, we won't go into it too much, but there's often a big difference between my expectation as the adult child and my mum's or my dad's expectation of what this should be or should not be. And it can be hard to sort of, am I acting in my best interest or am I acting in mum's best interest?
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. I think one of the tips, PJ, that we would have is that we never lose sight of what we're trying to achieve here. What is the outcome? And the outcome is we want to make sure that mum and dad very clearly voice how they want to live. And then like any good business or organisation, businesses and organisations are successful because they have the right people doing the right job at the right time. So being very clear on the roles and responsibilities to get the job done. And when it comes to the family, I think it also needs to be very clearly understood by the family. What are the roles and responsibilities that we as sons and daughters have to make sure that we help mum and dad live the life that they want to live? And even down to things like, the legal side, we need to make sure that our wills are up to date. We need to make sure that we've got enduring powers of attorney in place. Well, when it comes to an enduring power of attorney, it's important to make sure that the right people are tasked with doing the right job. And what I mean by that is, nominating me, PJ, to be the enduring power of attorney for, we're brothers, PJ, and for mum. But I'm hopeless with money, and it might be just best that you, PJ, are the financial authority for mum. So that just makes sense that you put the right people in place to do the jobs that need to be done.
Okay, good. And there's a lot of stuff that you just said to unpack, and I've been taking some notes, and I want to duck and weave around a few of these topics. But one of the things that, again, I've noticed in your brochure, and I think that for anyone listening or watching to this needs to understand, is that, of course, you don't just go from from everything's normal to mom or dad or both are in an aged care facility. There's oftentimes a transition period. So you might start off with a home care scenario where they're still living at home, but maybe they've got someone coming in, a nurse or a care worker or something to check in on them, obviously family members. They might then transition into some higher level of care, like an aged care facility. And then ultimately, I suppose, as they reach end of life, they could end up in a very high care facility, a palliative care type thing, where they're actually going to ultimately pass away in that environment. So maybe if you could just talk to that a little bit, how people can view the transition periods that they might experience with their parents as they age and as they move through that cycle, and then even how you guys assist with all of that.
Yeah. So actually, it's interesting you raise that, because Shayne and I were just having a conversation this morning following a conversation I'd had with a client around recognising the actual gradual stages of the ageing process. And I think we're so tuned into responding to like a big event or a significant sort of flag before we kind of clock that we're at the next stage, it can become hard to actually miss the day-to-day subtleties. And often what we're exposed to regularly, we just stop seeing. So, which is why sometimes, the adult child that's closest isn't always the best one to actually recognise when a shift is required. Sometimes it's the sibling from afar coming in and going, oh my God, like this is a completely different picture than what I saw 6 months ago or 12 months ago. I suppose it's sort of akin to putting a frog in a pot of cold water and slowly turning on the tap. Like you don't, if the environment slowly changes, we often miss the cues, which means that then we're often only responding when something happens. So when a fall happens or when a significant shift in maybe there's a diagnosis that's requires some sort of treatment intervention or something like that. So that's usually what will trigger the cues. And the system itself is designed, and the government's more, put a lot more resources in the part that keeps people at home, because they recognise that people generally want to stay at home. They also recognise that, you can do an awful lot with people in the right home environment before someone actually needs to go into residential care. So just one thing to flag with you sort of mentioned about sort of 3 different transitions. The big transition for most people would be, I'm getting different levels of home care, and then I get sufficiently frail that I need to look at residential care. Residential care in this country is just residential care. There's no high or low within it anymore. It's designed to only be accessed when you are in that very frail aged state, or if you have cognitive difficulties that make it unsafe for you to be at home. So, but it's not what it used to be, where it was like a hostel and then nursing home kind of set up now. So that changed with the Living Longer legislation, 2014. So, and to access any funded service, you need to do that through the My Aged Care portal, which is a government website, and then they will send out an assessment team depending on what it is that you're sort of talking about. So there's quite a lot of low-level support that you can access. Commonwealth Home Support Program, which is just sort of an extra couple of hours maybe to help with some shopping or cleaning, and then you sort of start coming into the home care program, which goes from a couple of hours through to about sort of 20 odd hours a week before you need to access residential care.
The typical Aussie ethos, PJ, is around, should be right, mate. I can do this. I can cope. We're not really good at putting our hands up to say, hey, I need a bit of help. And when it comes to aging and getting some care, typically the starting point is exactly that, where, you know, we live in a big house, we might have some steps, you know, we're getting a little bit older, and, you know, just keeping the house clean on a daily basis is becoming a bit of a chore. So we put our hands up and say, hey, we need a bit of hand with that. Or we might have a decent sized yard, and getting out and doing the lawn mowing and those sorts of things becomes a bit tougher, and we might just put our hands up and say, hey, we need a bit of a hand with that. So the care process at that point normally starts off with some fairly, you know, using the industry technical terms, some low needs. But then as you get older, they start to sort of, you know, ramp up a bit, where you might need a bit more help around, you know, tending for some wounds or those sorts of things. But it's typically a gradual process. I've never met anybody who has gleefully skipped into leaving their home to go into a permanent aged care facility. Not one person I've met.
They usually go kicking and screaming, don't they? Well, not kicking.
They normally go kicking and screaming. Yeah, that's right. But it's people go to those places for a reason, and that is the care that they can get in the home is just not at a sufficient level for their needs and their safety. So you know, those sorts of progressions, if you like, are fairly normal. We just, again, need to start to feel very comfortable having the conversations. And just to give you another example before, PJ, and this is a real life example that I see time and time again, and you in your role will see this as well, PJ, when it comes to we'll talk about money here, managing the family finances, and we've got a husband and wife or partners. Typically what happens is that one person gets nominated to do that job for whatever reason. Again, they were sick that day or were away for the meeting, so they got nominated, or just because they are organised and good at managing money or whatever it is. Typically what we see is that one person will manage the money, and the other person just sort of goes along and says, well, you know, Whenua was looking after the money in our household, I trust her. And all of a sudden Whenua's not around for whatever reason, and I've got to then take over the role of managing the money, and I don't even know where to start. So again, it probably ties back into the family discussion, PJ, around you know, families having that conversation around how do you manage your money, mum and dad, and without sort of going into the nitty gritty of, you know, well, how much have you got and where is it? But it's handy to know those sorts of things. It's handy to know that, and I know in my personal situation when I was dealing with this, I had no idea where my relative banked, and I needed to know that. So having those conversations was really important.
Good. And it sounds really, ultimately what we're saying here is talk, have a conversation, have it early, and don't be afraid to have it. But if you start having this conversation early in, I was going to say early in life, but early as, you know, in the aging process of your parents, then when the time comes to have maybe a more difficult conversation, they're already prepped in some respects. You've already opened that door. You've already started to have that conversation. They're not surprised or taken off guard or, you know, just completely shocked by, you know, a suggestion, for example, that they might need to go into aged care immediately because they've had a bad fall. So I think that's a very common and strong theme that I'm getting through what you guys are saying. And I really appreciate that. It's a don't go it alone mentality. And she won't always be right. Like, we need to, you know, look after each other and help each other out. There was something that you guys talked about briefly there, a document. And I want to just delve into this because I don't think a lot of people understand what this document is. And there's two actually, but I want to talk about the enduring power of attorney. Now, people have heard of power of attorneys before. That's a pretty common, you know, word in our vernacular, but an enduring power of attorney. Can you just talk about what an enduring power of attorney is and what it does for the family?
Yep. Well, first of all, I'll preface this by saying, PJ, I'm not a lawyer. So I won't get into the legal technicalities, but in Australia, depending on which state you live in, and as crazy as this seems, that every state has their own laws around these sorts of documents. But the legal documents, let's take New South Wales, for instance. So in New South Wales, well, let's go right back to the beginning. A will. People having a will that is current and in place is very, very important. And the number of people who I talk to who go, oh, I don't want to talk about a will because it's like putting the first nail in my coffin and, you know, I'm thinking about dying and all that sort of stuff. But, you know, you've seen it, PJ, I've seen it, lawyers see it every day. When that's done right, it's people typically have really, really good outcomes. When it's done wrong or not at all, we typically have very, very bad or not as good as possible outcomes. And the sad story is, and I don't know what the number is, PJ, whether you've seen it or not, but it's something like 60 or 70% of Australians don't have a will that reflects their current situation or their current wishes.
Yeah, it's too high.
That is really sad because it's something that can be fixed very, very quickly and at a very, very low price. And I said, I'm not a lawyer, but if you talk to lawyers about where they've seen things go very right and very wrong, I reckon the cost would be high for those where it goes wrong. So getting a will in place, important. When it comes to what you said before, PJ, about the enduring powers of attorney, in New South Wales, there's two types. There's one where there's a power of attorney where you look after people's financial matters. And there's another document which looks at people's health or care needs, their living arrangements. So they call that a guardian document in New South Wales. But the power of attorney means that depending on what a trigger event might be, I can basically step into your shoes, PJ. If you've nominated me as your power of attorney, I can step into your shoes to act on your behalf. So I can do everything that you could do right now. It's a huge responsibility, and it really needs to be thought through very carefully in terms of who you nominate to do that job. And it's same with the guardianship arrangement where it's, you know, I can make decisions for you in regards to your health and living, and that is a huge responsibility. If anyone's ever been through a situation where they've been a medical guardian for somebody and they've had to make a decision to turn off a switch, and I've seen that is a massive, massive responsibility. So getting those people, getting those documents in place and getting the right people, again, to do the right job at the right time is critical. And I was just saying this to Whenua before we came on with you today, PJ. I had a discussion with a family recently where there were a couple of sons and daughters, mum and dad, and for some reason, the power of attorney, the financial powers of attorney were given to the boys, and the guardianship or the medical responsibilities were given to the girls in the family. And after a bit of observation and some conversation, it became very clear to me and the family that maybe they weren't the best nominations because, to be very honest, I'm not mentioning names, the boys were hopeless at managing money. The girls were fantastic. So in that particular situation, having the girls nominated as the financial enduring powers of attorney would probably have been the best thing to do. And that is now being changed with a conversation.
If I could just add on this topic a couple of things that I see quite regularly in my day-to-day stuff too, just to draw attention to the fact you need to read the detail, like you need to be really clear on what it's actually giving you rights to do, because if you've got financial power of attorney, that doesn't mean that you've got rights over, you know, mum needs this treatment or not. And it's also about being really clear about when that power kicks in. It's usually to do with capacity, but, you know, you need to be clear, because often I see possibly some, you know, times where adult children perhaps, you know, and taking advantage is probably not the right word. Like, I think it comes from a well-intentioned place, but perhaps a little bit of preemptive decision-making before it probably should be in effect tending to happen. And the other thing, if there's multiples, is to pay really close attention to the little words, the and the or, and how that is written up in the actual document, because it can make a big difference if, say, one sibling passes away and no one's revisited the document, but the document requires, all parties to be in agreement, as opposed to one or the other kind of thing. So there's a few little details in those documents that's well worth really understanding. And the other thing I would say to that is, have the right person holding the right role, but also think about logistics. Like if the person who's got that power lives miles away and is difficult to get hold of because they've got dodgy internet and poor, postal service because they're out in remote Australia, and you need documents signed and fixed up, they may not be the best person, even if they are the best person. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because they're just not able to respond to the needs of responsibilities.
So, getting those things regularly, those documents regularly reviewed and done, getting the right people to do the right jobs, produces really good outcomes for people. And sometimes, and we see it a lot, PJ, when it comes to when those things haven't been done, and all of a sudden someone loses capacity and can't change those documents, you've just added another layer of complexity into your aged care journey life that you don't really need. And I've seen it. I've worked with people in that space, and it's, to be honest with you, it's a space you don't want to go near, because it just makes everything else more and more difficult and more emotionally charged.
No, I'm really glad you guys have delved into that, because it just reinforces, again, two things. First, you build on the idea that you need to communicate and you should talk to your family members, to your parents. And then secondly, and this, so critical, and you probably can't repeat it often enough, is to say you must have the appropriate legal documentation in place, and to both of your points, reviewed regularly, because things change. People lose capacity, or someone might move who has a role. Could be that enduring guardian or just a power of attorney over some financial assets, whatever, and they might need to change that. So I think we can both agree that one of the things that stops people, I think, from doing their wills and doing this stuff is they think it's expensive, which in reality it isn't expensive, because it saves you, or can save you, so much heartache and hassle with lawyers and everything else down the track, that it's worth investing the, I don't know if you have a price range in mind, but I sort of think $2,000 to $5,000 is probably enough to cover off, 99% of what someone needs to do in this space around the legal side. Do you reckon that's about right? I mean, depending upon the size of the estate, I suppose. And
yeah, that's right. So everyone's different, I suppose. But when it comes to, without putting an exact number on it, that the cost of getting these things done right initially versus the potential cost of getting it wrong at the other end, there's no comparison from what I've seen.
And that's ultimately what we're saying, is a little bit invested now can go a long way to not having to spend a lot of money later.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what's going on with my camera. It keeps focusing in and out, but anyway, we'll try not to have that be a distraction. Could you have another 10 or 15 minutes to spend? I know we got started a little bit late, but there's two topics I really want to cover off with you guys, and to delve just a little bit more deeply into this whole conversation around aging with dignity. And the first thing is, and I'm going to use the C word, I'm really sorry about this, but it's Centrelink, right? Dealing with Centrelink. These guys and gals, they're a critical part of the Australian social safety network. We all know that, but dealing with them can be an absolute web of just ludicrousness, right?
Yeah.
You guys are chuckling because you know what I'm talking about. I have tried to stay away from having to deal with Centrelink in any shape or form, because it can just be frustrating as all get out. So I don't know really where to begin this conversation, except to say, when you guys begin your family and do your family conferences, obviously the topic of Centrelink and benefits and this sort of thing will invariably come up. So I'll just handball that to you guys and say, where do you begin with the Centrelink conversation?
Yeah. Well, it's a big question, and it's something that we talk to families a lot about and deal with. I'll start with this, PJ. When it comes to going along this aged care journey with people that we love and care for most, it's about getting the right people on your team to get the job done, so to work through the issues. And when it comes to our business, our job is really to help people to navigate that journey. And one of the things that we talk about in terms of this is, how do we help families? And one of the big ways that we help families is we help save time. And Centrelink and dealing with Centrelink is a necessary part of the aged care journey. We need to keep the government up to date with our affairs, and that can be a time-sucking exercise. So our job is to take that away from families to say, you know what, you're really busy doing your stuff. How about we take some of that pressure away from you and give you back some of that time, and we will deal with Centrelink on your behalf. And there's ways that we can do that. But when it comes to, who's going to look after the Centrelink function within the family, and again, it comes back to, we've got elderly mum or dad, and PJ, you and I, the sons, and we're in our 40, 50 somethings, and we're busy. We've got a busy life. We, they talk about the Gen Xers and the baby boomers as the sandwich generation. Well, we're all busy with our own lives, trying to prepare for our retirement and pay off the mortgage and run the family. We've got kids who are probably, still at school or getting out of school and starting their own lives. And all of a sudden now we're dealing with an aged care situation with or for our mum and dad. And we get pressed for time. And, when I went through this personally, I used to say to people, it was like having a second full-time job. I just couldn't get my head out of the room at any point in time. So when it comes to Centrelink and updating them, yes, it's a process we need to go through. It can be a time-sucking exercise through no fault of the staff in Centrelink, but it takes time. We've got to pick up the phone and ring, and we're not the only ones in Australia ringing Centrelink, or we go down to the office, Centrelink office, and we're not the only one knocking on their door. So keeping Centrelink up to date, filling out the right forms, and that's another one I see, PJ, is making sure that people fill out the right form for this, because like everything, everything's got a form and everything's got a form number. And if you send me the wrong form, well, I'm sending it back to you. In fact, I don't even do that. I don't send it back to you. I just don't even tell you. But making sure you fill out the right form and give the right information is critical. And one of the, just to give you a live example, PJ, one of the documents that we fill out for families when it comes to someone moving into permanent care is, they call it an assets and income form, an SA 457 or whatever it might be. And that document is a very, very critical document. Families are filling that out to send to the government to say, here are mum and dad's assets and income. And from that, a lot of things happen. Age pensions get adjusted, aged care fees get calculated, etc., etc. And if for some reason you filled out the wrong form or haven't given the right information, that can just get you into an absolute world of pain and hurt. And we just say to families, how about we take over that? We'll help you fill that form out. We'll make sure it gets to the right people, and we make sure that we get the right answers back. And PJ, no one has ever said to me, no, Shayne, that just doesn't sound good enough for me. I'm going to do it myself.
Yeah, I hear you. I certainly, this is music to my ears, right? Because I hate having to deal with Centrelink, and clients ring me and ask me and send me forms to look at, and I just go, oh my God, I have no idea with this stuff, right? And I think the moral of the story is use an expert, someone or a firm that knows how to navigate these waters. You wouldn't get in a whitewater raft on the Colorado River and just grab a paddle and go for it. You would want a seasoned guide to take you down the river so that you didn't kill yourself. Now, obviously, the outcome of Centerlink is going to be you're dead, but you certainly don't want to do the wrong thing and end up owing them money for some reason. So
That's right.
Any other tips on Centerlink? So actually, what we might do, I'll segue into the last item that I wanted to sort of cover off with you guys today, and it does involve Centerlink, but it is this whole chestnut of the accommodation bond, RAD, the daily allowance and so forth when you move into aged care. Maybe we could probably do a whole segment on this, an hour, I'm sure, but maybe in the remaining 5 or 7 minutes that we've got today, can you just weave that into the story of the whole journey where we start off, staying in our home and then eventually moving into that aged care facility, and how the accommodation bond fits into that, what it is, and what people can expect from that?
Yeah, good question. Every industry has got their own gobbledygook, PJ, or their own jargon, and the financial planning industry that you and I are in is a classic example of that. Well, the aged care industry is probably even better at their own gobbledygook and jargon. You'll hear acronyms like RADs and DAPs and RACs and DACs and MPIRs, and so all that terminology is very confusing to people who aren't in the industry. But when it comes to moving into permanent care, the way I explain this to people is when you go into a permanent care situation, you're moving from your home into an aged care facility, there's 2 things that we're looking for here. One is we got to pay for our care, what care we're going to get while we move into that place. And we're also paying for our accommodation, our room. And the best way to explain it is when you hear acronyms like RADs and DAPs. The way I explain it is when you move into an aged care facility, you've got the choice of either buying your room, a bit like buying your house, or renting your room, exactly like renting a house. Or when it comes to permanent care, there can be a combination of the 2. So you can buy half your room and rent the rest. So you can have a combination of a RAD and a DAP. And when it comes to you're looking at an aged care facility and you see that, the price of, come on in, PJ, the room is worth $350,000 or $500,000 or $750,000 or whatever it might be. The average room rate in Australia, I think last I looked, was around about 350,000, 400,000, but it could be a little bit less than that, it could be more than that. And people think, how am I going to find the money for that? Do I might even not even have $400,000. So how am I going to afford aged care? The one thing I say to everyone out there is aged care is affordable to everybody, no matter what your means are. So you may not own a home and you might only have $20,000 in a bank account. Can I go to aged care permanently? Yes, you can. The government have structured it so that you can. Right up to, the classic things that we get involved in here, PJ, is when someone is living in their own home, moves in an aged care facility, what should I do, Shayne, with the home? Should I leave it vacant? Should I rent it? Or should I sell it? Every one of those decisions or choices has an outcome in terms of somebody's age pension and the aged care fees they're going to pay. So our role here is to clearly show families and people what those decisions look like on paper. And so when it comes back to, paying the RAD or the $350,000 or whatever it might be, I say to people, you don't have to find all the money and provide and hand that over in one hit. There's ways that you can structure your finances and your decisions to make it affordable for people over a longer period of time. And that's what we do at Family Aged Care Advocates. We show people what those options look like. So, sometimes putting a whole heap of money towards the room, paying a big amount of that RAD is the right decision, but sometimes it's not the right decision. And I explain it to people. It's a bit like learning to swim, PJ. When you're going to learn to swim, what do? Do you dive into the shallow end and ease your way out to the deep end, or do you just run into the pool and dive straight into the deep end? when it comes to paying money to aged care facilities, I say to people, it's best to sort of start off and maybe ease your way into the deep end, because if for some reason you give the aged care facility too much money and all of a sudden you've cut yourself short and you're going to run out of money in the next couple of years, it's hard to get that money back.
Yes.
So
that's a big issue, and unfortunately, I didn't know you guys until recently. I had a number of clients, a few, not a heap, but a few clients who've come to me to do reverse mortgages, because I do finance as well, and to organize so they can pay an accommodation bond. And only recently had I really learned that, you can negotiate with the provider and you can get more favorable terms and structure it in a way that is works for the client, as opposed to, I'm sure, the aged care facility is going to structure it in a way that suits them in the first instance, right? So it's good to know that there are advocates like you guys out there who can help people navigate these waters. So that's a fantastic way actually to wrap this up. Are there any parting pieces of advice that you would give someone who's watched all of this now, the 50 odd minutes of this interview, and is saying, geez, I need to maybe start this conversation, or there's some things I need to tidy up? What would you say what advice would you give to anyone?
Well, I guess probably the common theme is, start talking sooner rather than later, start planning, and probably check your documents, like have a look, see who's allocated what jobs and whether that's feasible. Get your legal and money stuff in order, your resourcing stuff.
Yep.
If you know what your resourcing is, you've got better options.
Yep. I'd agree, PJ. What tips I'd say to people is start the conversation early. Be very, very aware of what's going on inside the family, and don't be afraid to put your hand up and have that conversation. The second thing I'd say is, and a lot of this case with the aged care journey, is people don't know what they don't know in everything in life. In the aged care space, that's really, really important to understand, is you don't know what you don't know. And it's like anything in life, PJ, if the sum of the parts is always greater than the whole. If you get the right people on your team, you'll get the right outcomes. And that's what we're here to do at Family Age Advocates, is typically to be, we just want to be a member of the family team to get this done right, so that we can make sure that mum and dad clearly articulated is how they want to live, and we help them to age with dignity. In terms of a starting point for us, so we've got a website, www.familyagecareadvocates.com.au. If anyone wants to reach out to us by going to our website and just asking a question through Contact Us, we get a lot of great questions through there, and we make little videos out of those questions. And so that'd be one way to contact us, or via you, of course, PJ. Facebook. We've got a Facebook page, business page. So we just really, because we have been, especially Whenua, been in the aged care industry for a number of years, we just want to make sure that we are helping people make really good decisions at the right time, so that they can have great outcomes for the people they love and care for most. In a nutshell, that's what we do, our purpose.
Yeah.
Beautiful place to end the interview. I have really, really enjoyed talking with you guys today. I have a renewed sense of joy that there are people out there that can help my clients navigate these very, troubling waters at sometimes. And just again, for anyone who didn't get that web address, it's www.faca.com.au, Family Aged Care Advocates. I've been talking with Shayne Hayes and Whenua Oner of Family Aged Care Advocates today. My name is PJ Patterson for Keystone Financial. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you once again, the two of you, for being on my show.
Thank you for having us. Really appreciate it, PJ. Thanks, everybody.
Everybody.
Yeah.